If we are driving a car or riding a bike and approaching a four-way stop intersection with several cars in other lanes and poor visibility due to fog, how do we know when it is safe to continue driving through the intersection? While neurons of the general senses detect touch, temperature, and pain, the special senses detect stimuli such as light, chemicals, and sounds and transduce them into action potentials that reach the central nervous system. These special senses involve olfaction, gustation, auditory, visual, and vestibular sensations. Some of these special senses will be used to help us determine when to enter the intersection. Transduction occurs when a physical or chemical stimulus is converted into an action potential that can be deciphered by the brain. General and most forms of special sensory stimuli are processed by sensory nuclei and are transmitted to the thalamus and primary cortex areas for processing. Sensory signals are then sent to other areas of the body for further processing and actions. Vision is the perception of light reflected by objects. This light is perceived through the eye, which consists of two primary parts, the eyeball and the surrounding components that help support, protect, or move the eyeball. Once the light is detected by the eye, this information, along with the visual pathways in the central nervous system, help determine the size, shape, and color of the object, the rate and direction the object is moving in, and the distance from the object. One of the main components of the eye that contributes to vision is the retina, which consists of two layers. The outer layer is a pigmented epithelial layer, whereas the inner layer contains photoreceptors along with layers of other cell types. Within the inner layer are the two main types of photoreceptors called rods and cones. Cones have pigments that allow the eye to perceive color and produce a high acuity vision or sharp vision. Cones function best in bright lights, such as during the daytime. However, rods produce a low acuity vision and do not detect color. They are more sensitive to dim light. The ability to see during the nighttime can be contributed to rods since cones are non-functional due to the lack of light. Because of the rods that a person has in their eyes, this would be one of the special senses used to determine when it was safe to cross the intersection. Because the rods help detect objects in dim lighting, such as foggy weather, a person would be able to see the other cars nearby the intersection. The ear is primarily associated with the special sense of hearing. The ear is composed of three main parts, the outer, middle, and inner ear. The inner ear isn't typically associated with hearing, but rather the fifth special sense of vestibular sensation. The outer ear is what most people believe is the ear. The shell-shaped auricle or pinna is composed of elastic cartilage covered with skin. The auricle helps direct sound waves into the external auditory canal, which is a slightly curved tunnel that ends at the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. The tympanic membrane is composed of a thin layer of epithelium and connective tissue and separates the outer ear from the middle ear. It helps direct the energy of sound waves to reach the inner ear. The middle ear is a hollow chamber in the temporal bone that is lined with mucous membrane. The middle ear and the nasopharynx are connected by the pharotympanic tube or the auditory tube, which contributes to the equalization of pressure on both sides of the tympanic membrane. The middle ear also contains the three smallest bones in the body called the ossicles. The ossicles are connected by synovial joints that form a bridge from the middle ear to the inner ear. The ossicles contribute to amplifying and converting sound waves into fluid movements, which can lead to action potentials. There are two skeletal muscles called the tympani and the stapedius muscle that reduce movement of the ossicles, which help prevent damage by loud sounds at low frequencies. The inner ear is a cavity that is located within the temporal bone. Of the three regions of the inner ear, only one region, the cochlea, is associated with hearing. Because Because the ear is able to detect sound waves, which are a displacement of air molecules in response to an object moving, the sound waves have to be transduced into action potentials for the brain to be aware and interpret the sound. The sounds that are generated by the sound waves can be described in terms of pitch, which is the frequency of how many times the object vibrates back and forth during a certain period, and loudness, which is the amplitude of the sound wave determined by the difference of high and low air pressure. Due to this, the sense of hearing may play a role in determining if it is safe to cross into the foggy intersection. Because a component of hearing is determining the location of the sound, one may be able to determine where the other objects, in this case the cars, are located to help determine if it is safe to continue into the intersection. Vestibular sensation helps maintain equilibrium as the body or head moves or tilts, and is dependent on information from various sources such as vision and some stimuli detected in the inner ear. The inner ear helps detect two types of equilibrium. Static equilibrium refers to maintaining balance when the head and body are not moving, but rather the head is tilted. Dynamic equilibrium refers to maintaining balance as the head or body are moving. A third type of equilibrium, unrelated to the organs of the inner ear, is rotational equilibrium, which refers to maintaining balance during rotational movements, such as turning the head. In this situation, if someone were riding a bike, vestibular sensation could be one of the senses that play a role in safely making it through the intersection. Maintaining balance during head or body movement doesn't help determine the safety of entering the intersection or increase awareness of the other vehicles. However, when turning the head to determine if other cars were entering the intersection, vestibular sensation would help maintain balance to avoid falling off the bike. The visual field is what each eye sees on its own. However, this term can also refer to when both eyes are open and is divided into the left and right visual field. The focal point is what the eyes are gazing upon in the distance. The edges of what can be seen on each side of the visual field are called monocular vision, whereas the center of the visual field seen by both eyes is called binocular vision. Each retina detects visual stimuli from areas of their visual field respectively. Because some of the visual stimuli cross at the optic chiasma, or where the nerve fibers from each retina cross over into the alternate side of the brain, images detected within one visual field are processed by the opposite-sided hemisphere of the brain. For example, all stimuli from the right visual field are processed by the left hemisphere of the brain. After the stimuli passes through the optic chiasma, the retinal ganglion axons are called optic tracts, which most axons in the optic tracts terminate in the lateral genucleate nucleus of the thalamus, and only 10% terminate in other areas of the midbrain. The visual stimuli travel from the thalamus to the primary visual cortex in the medial part of the occipital lobe. Hair cells, which are spiral organs that contain receptor cells, are grouped into rows. One row of inner hair cells and 3 rows of outer hair cells. The hair cells are responsible for detecting sound. As sound is transmitted through the inner ear, action potentials are generated in the axon of the cochlear nerve after the depolarized hair cell releases neurotransmitters. These action potentials propagate through the axons of the vestibular cochlear nerve and synapse at the cochlear nuclei. Axons from the cochlear nuclei then synapse on the superior olivary nucleus and the pons before comparing information from both ears to determine the location that the sound is coming from. The auditory stimuli are relayed to the thalamus, which is believed to process the combination of sounds according to the frequency and time interval. The thalamus stimulates neurons of the primary auditory cortex and the temporal lobe, which contributes to the conscious awareness of sound, analysis of location, pitch, and loudness. The vestibular pathway allows for the vestibular stimuli to reach the central nervous system. Action potentials propagate to the vestibular nuclei along their axons and synapse in the brainstem. The vestibular nuclei relay signals simultaneously to several areas of the central nervous system. The thalamus and inferior parietal lobe receive stimuli regarding conscious awareness of the head position and movement. The cranial nerve nuclei receive stimuli regarding coordination of eye movement in response to head movement. The cerebellum and spinal cord receive stimuli regarding coordination of muscle movement that maintains balance in response to head movement. Olfaction is more commonly known as the sense of smell. The olfactory system allows the body to detect the presence of odorants or chemicals in the air. Once the odorants are detected, the olfactory system neurons are able to transduce the chemical signals of the odorants into electrical signals. The brain is not able to interpret the chemical signals, so transducing them into electrical signals allows the brain to interpret the transmitted information. Because humans are able to smell approximately 400,000 odorants, the olfactory system plays a vital role in human life. The olfactory system allows for essential functions such as detecting dangerous chemicals in the air, such as smoke. Olfaction does not play a role in the situation of the car sitting at the intersection. If one was riding a bike or driving a car with the windows open, a person may be able to detect certain odorants such as the fuel that is used to power the car or the exhaust coming from the train. However, because these scents can linger, it would be difficult to distinguish if it was safe to cross the intersection due to it being a new or old odorant. Olfaction initiates with the olfactory epithelium, which is found in the superior region of each nasal cavity. The olfactory epithelium is composed of 3 different types of cells. Olfactory neurons, the first type of cell within the olfactory epithelium, detects odorants and are classified as chemoreceptors since they detect a presence of a chemical in the air rather than our neurotransmitters. Olfactory neurons are composed of apical modified dendrites, cell bodies, and basal axons. The neuron's modified dendrite projects into the roof of the nasal cavity, and the end of the dendrite has a tip that contains olfactory cilia that extend the surface area used for odor detection. The olfactory cilia extend into the mucus that is made by the olfactory glands. The axons of the olfactory nerves are grouped and travel through small holes to reach the central nervous system. These groups of axons form the olfactory nerve. The axon synapse on mitral cells in the olfactory bulb, which is a structure within the brain that is superior to the ethmoid bone and inferior to the frontal lobe. The axons then depart from the olfactory bulb through the olfactory tract to transmit the smell stimuli to other parts of the brain. The second type of olfactory neurons are supporting cells, which support and surround the olfactory neurons. They also contain pigment, which gives the epithelium its color. The third type of olfactory cells are basal cells. This type of cell is a stem cell that can develop into an olfactory neuron. Each olfactory neuron only has a lifespan of 30 to 60 days because of its exposed location. Because olfactory neurons have such a short lifespan, basal cells are essential for constant generation of new olfactory neurons. Since the olfactory neurons are vital in detecting and transporting odor, without olfactory neurons, a person would not be able to smell. Odorants enter the nasal cavity through air, but a small amount of the odorants reach the olfactory epithelium when a person is breathing normally. This contributes to why a person may sniff or inhale more deeply to smell an odorant more easily. This allows the nasal cavity to draw in more air at a quicker pace, which forces the odorant across the olfactory epithelium. Then, olfactory neurons detect the odorants, which initiate action potentials. The action potentials then send signals to specific parts of the brain, which later allows the person to identify the scent. Once an odorant reaches the olfactory epithelium, the odorants typically bind to odorant binding proteins, which are sent to receptors located on the olfactory cilia. For the detection and identification of an odorant to occur, the stimuli are transmitted to the central nervous system and specific areas of the brain. First, the axons of the olfactory neurons that compose the olfactory nerve carry the stimuli to the olfactory bulb in the central nervous system. The axons terminate in the olfactory nerve, which is inferior to the frontal lobe of the brain. The axons synapse with the mitral neuron dendrites, and if enough local depolarizations occur, the mitral cells will have an action potential. If an action potential is initiated, the stimulus travels from the olfactory bulb to the primary olfactory cortex in the temporal lobe. The action potential will travel along the axons of mitral cells and form a large portion of the olfactory tract. The stimuli are provided to the primary cortex, which is responsible for identification of the odorant. Unlike special senses, olfaction is the only sensory pathway that does not synapse in the thalamus. Gustation is more commonly known as the sense of taste. The sense of taste is not just related to the flavor of food, but also sensations of texture and temperature and the smell of the food. Ammerman discusses how most of what humans taste is actually the odor of food as it arrives to the olfactory epithelium through the pharynx and nasal cavities. The texture and temperature of food relate to taste as well, which are detected by general sensory neurons, as some foods just taste better warm. However, a significant factor of the sense of gustation is how chemoreceptors respond to chemicals. Taste buds are small clusters of receptor cells scattered on the lateral surfaces of the papillae. Once the taste buds are stimulated, sensory neurons transmit stimuli to the central nervous system. These taste buds contain 3 types of cells. Each taste bud has approximately 100 gustatory cells, or taste cells, that are specialized type of epithelial cell with microvilli that have receptors responsible for detecting specific tastes. Each gustatory cell has basal ends which form synapses with receptive endings of a sensory neuron which carry the stimuli to the central nervous system through the facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus nerves. Because gustatory cells have a short lifespan, approximately 10 to 14 days, basal cells are necessary for gustation as they differentiate into gustatory cells. The third type of cell found in taste buds are supporting cells. While these cells don't play a role in the sensation of taste, they surround the gustatory cells, providing them with physical support. The sense of taste is determined by the detection of different chemicals. These chemicals can be grouped into 5 different classes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. The sense of gustation or taste would not be used to determine when it is safe to proceed at an intersection. Because no chemicals would enter the mouth instructing the driver when to proceed, this is the special sense that does not play a role in this situation. In order for one to experience taste, the taste receptors must be activated. This occurs when the substance or chemical reaches the taste bud through the crevices in the palpeae. Saliva is a substance that helps dissolve other substances, allowing for the chemicals to reach the taste buds. Once the taste sensation reaches the taste bud, it also reaches the gustatory cells, which transduce the chemical signal into an electric signal. First, depolarization of the gustatory cell's plasma membrane occurs due to changes in ion movements. The depolarization of the membrane initiates the opening of a voltage-gated calcium ion channel, which allows calcium ions to enter the cell. This typically results in a local potential. Gustatory cells don't generate action potentials as they are small enough that a local potential spreads rapidly across the membrane. Therefore, the action potential could be unnecessary. The axons of 3 nerves, facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus, convey the taste stimuli from the tongue to the central nervous system. Each of these 3 nerves transmit the stimuli from different areas related to gustation. The facial nerves convey taste stimuli from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, and the glossopharyngeal nerve conveys taste stimuli from the remaining posterior 1/3 of the tongue. However, the vagus nerve does not play a major role in gustation as it innervates taste buds, which are scattered on the base of the tongue and posterior plate. The axons of these nerves terminate in the solitary nucleus of the medulla oblongata by synapsing on the central sensory neurons, while some of the neurons in the solitary nucleus are connected to the parasympathetic neurons and help control the production of saliva. Other axons synapse on the neurons located in the thalamus, which send taste stimuli to the primary gustatory cortex in the parietal lobe, which is responsible for integrating, detecting, and identifying the stimuli. These stimuli are conveyed to the insula, where the integration occurs. the inferior portion of the frontal lobe, which helps form a complete picture of the taste, and the limbic system, which helps construct emotional reactions to the taste. The brain is able to interpret information that is transmitted as action potentials through cranial nerves. Before the stimuli reaches the brain of the central nervous system, the stimuli are transduced into an electric signal and action potentials are generated. This allows the brain to interpret the information and act accordingly. Ammerman discusses how the special senses collect and report information simultaneously to allow the brain to compose an overall picture of the situation. Once the brain receives the information regarding the stimuli, it is able to process it as necessary. For example, Ammerman asserts that the act of seeing involves much more than simple detection and conscious awareness of visual stimuli, and that the areas of the brain involved in processing visual information are extensive. While the axons project the lateral genucleate nucleus and primary visual cortex, the image that would be created is distorted. From the primary cortex, the visual information can be sent into two pathways, either the posterior or anterior pathway. The posterior or dorsal pathway involves the parietal lobe and is associated with interpreting motion. The anterior or ventral pathway ends in the inferior portion of the temporal lobe and is associated with processing color and forms of objects. The information from both gustation and olfaction is originally received by chemoreceptors, which respond to chemicals. Auditory senses gather information from sound waves, which depolarized hair cells generate action potentials from. In order for the brain to interpret information from those senses, they have to be transduced into electric signals. In the example of determining when it is safe to enter the crowded intersection, the special senses are gathering information. In the specific instance, only the visual and auditory information may be relevant, but once the information is transduced and the action potentials are generated, the brain is able to determine whether or not there is a car in the intersection and if it is safe to pass. The specialized receptor cells for each special sense detect the stimuli and are then transmitted to the central nervous system by cranial nerves. Olfaction has olfactory nerves, gustation has gustatory cells, vision uses photoreceptors, and auditory uses hair cells. With the exception of olfaction, each special sensory stimuli takes the same basic pathway from the brainstem to the thalamus to the primary sensory cortex. The olfactory stimuli pass the information from the olfactory tracts to the olfactory cortices. The frontal lobe then integrates the information into one coherent picture, and the limbic system determines the emotional and behavioral responses. As the action potentials are generated, the information is relayed to the central nervous system by the motory sensory division of the peripheral nervous system. The cranial nerves, such as the facial or vagus nerves, carry the information to the brain. Once the information in the brain is processed, the brain needs to react to the information that was gathered from the special senses. In order for the body to react to the information, it needs to transmit a signal to other parts of the body. The brain would send the messages through the spinal nerves. If the body needed to physically respond, in this case, it could either be by pressing down on the gas pedal to enter the intersection or by pressing down on the brake to avoid entering the intersection. The information would be associated with the somatic motor division, which is composed of neurons that transmit signals through spinal nerves to skeletal muscle.